Many nations and peoples in our world today find themselves very concerned with a tiny sliver of land in the Middle East known as the West Bank. Over and over again, the charge is made that Jewish settlements in the West Bank are illegal according to international law. In this video and in the ones to follow, we will examine whether or not that claim is in fact accurate, and in so doing we will answer the legal question: is the West Bank occupied territory? We will restrict ourselves to the legal aspect of this question, not the multifaceted political sides, and we will base our presentation on the expert legal opinion of international legal expert Howard Grief, a native of the city of Montreal, graduate of the law school of McGill University, current resident of Jerusalem, and founder of the Office of Israeli Constitutional Law. His book, The Legal Foundation and Borders of Israel Under International Law, was published in 2008 by Mazo Publishers, Jerusalem. Our presentation will be divided into 7 sections, the most important of which is the first one, the International Legal Foundation, which will be dealt with in this video. Subsequent videos will cover the remainder of the presentation: Palestine during the Mandate, Palestine after the Mandate, the Palestinians, Israel undermining its own sovereignty, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and finally, what can be done today. So let us now begin with an examination of the International Legal Foundation. To understand the legal status of the West Bank, we must go back to the events that took place during and after World War I, when the foundational legal building blocks were put into place, building blocks that are necessary to answer our question. We will start with the Balfour Declaration. I shall make 3 points about this declaration. First, it was a non-binding, unilateral declaration which favored the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and stated that His Majesty's government would use their best endeavors to facilitate it. Second, although it favored the creation in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it stated that the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities would not be prejudiced. Clearly, therefore, the political rights of other communities could be prejudiced. Third, to make that point even clearer, the Balfour Declaration stated that the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in other countries would not be prejudiced. So when considered as a whole, it is clear that the intent of the British government in 1917 was to create a Jewish nation and to give the Jewish people political rights in that nation to the exclusion of any other people. And finally, that nation would be known as Palestine. The Ottoman Empire ruled over the Middle East for hundreds of years before it was defeated during World War I. For example, it dominated Jerusalem for 400 years, from 1517 until 1917, when it was driven out by the British. This photograph shows the surrender of Jerusalem to British troops after the Battle of Jerusalem in December of 1917. But Great Britain was not the only nation that fought a war against the Ottoman Empire. There were 4 nations in total: Great Britain, France, Italy, and Japan. Contrary to a popular misconception, the United States of America never declared war on the Ottoman Empire. Now, since this group of 4 collectively defeated the Turks, the group of 4 collectively acquired sovereignty over the Middle East, including the portion of land that would become known as Palestine. Now, this is important to understand. The big question that the group of 4 asked themselves was, what should we do with this sovereignty? Unlike the behavior of most conquering nations, the Allies agreed not to retain sovereignty over the Middle East for themselves, which was their legal right under international law, but rather to set up a legal system to transfer sovereignty to the indigenous peoples of the area. This legal system would become known as the Mandate System. We will now explain briefly this Mandate System, where it came from, and what it was all about. Therefore, the next building block we need to put into place is a document known as the Smuts Resolution of January the 30th, 1919. Jan Christian Smuts was a South African statesman who served in the British government during World War I and was a member of Prime Minister David Lloyd George's war cabinet. David Lloyd George was the Prime Minister of Great Britain from 1916 until 1922. Smuts was a key negotiator at the Paris Peace Conference, the post-World War I conference that laid out the terms of the various peace treaties, and that formalized the mandate system in a memorandum that now bears his name. This memorandum, known as the Smuts Resolution, was also adopted at the conference. Two main points need to be made here. First, the Smuts Resolution was approved by the Supreme Council of Allied and Associated Powers. And in this case, since the United States of America was an associated power, the United States of America accepted the validity of the Smuts Resolution. And second, it is in this document that we first see international recognition that the Ottoman Empire officially relinquished its sovereignty to the principal Allied powers. Let us now map out a structure to help us understand how the territories of the defeated Ottoman Empire devolved after World War I. For the sake of completeness, although not directly related to our topic, is the territory that was known as the Hejaz. It was not a mandate because it was declared independent in 1916 during World War I by a local Arab ruler known as the Sharif of Mecca. We will mention him more in our second video. 3 mandates were created from the ruins of the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East: Syria, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. France was responsible for Syria, while Great Britain was responsible for Mesopotamia and Palestine. Generally speaking, the Group of Four desired to transfer sovereignty over these mandated countries to the local peoples that constituted the majority in these countries, that is, the Arabs. However, Palestine would be the exception to the rule. Whereas sovereignty to Syria and Mesopotamia was earmarked for the local Arabs because they constituted the majority of the population in those areas, Palestine, on the other hand, was earmarked for the Jewish people, even though they did not yet constitute a majority of the local population in that country. Palestine was to be treated as a special case because of the conscious attempt by Great Britain to redress the wrong done to the Jewish people by the Romans 1900 years ago. Sovereignty in Palestine would not go to the majority population of the local inhabitants, but rather it would go to world Jewry as a whole. And finally, we show how these mandates and the Hejaz evolved into the nations we are more familiar with today. The green color represents Arab nations, the blue color, the single non-Arab nation. Now, during the Paris Peace Conference, the League of Nations was established with the lofty goal of preventing catastrophic wars in the future. The Covenant of the League of Nations, which was adopted on April 28, 1919, incorporated the mandate system as its article number 22. This is an important milestone in the development of Jewish sovereignty over Palestine, as we will shortly see. But before we go any further, it is important for us to understand what a mandate is. In short, a mandate was defined in the League of Nations Covenant as a sacred trust. A sacred trust that had tutelage responsibilities upon those nations willing to accept it. In other words, a mandate was like an estate held in trust for a minor. The trustee does not have the right to use the estate for its own interests, and it does not have the right to divide the estate and give it to someone else who is not an heir. Rather, it has the sacred responsibility to administer the estate on behalf of the minor until the minor reaches the age of majority and is then legally capable of assuming direct control over the estate without the trustee's involvement. Finally, the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919. This treaty lays out the terms of peace between the Allied and Associated Powers and Germany. Although we are not focusing on the treaty itself here, we do need to note one important fact. The Treaty of Versailles incorporated the Covenant of the League of Nations as Part 1 of the treaty. And as we have already seen, the mandate system was included as Article 22 of that covenant. Therefore, the mandate system was recognized as international law and acknowledged as such in such important international treaties as the League of Nations Covenant and the Treaty of Versailles. So we now ask the question, how did the Balfour Declaration go from being a unilateral, non-binding resolution of the British government to a multilateral, legally binding document acknowledged in international law? Let us review what we have learned. First, we had the Smuts Resolution, adopted by the Supreme Council of Allied and Associated Powers at the end of World War I. This resolution outlining the mandate system was incorporated as Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. The entire League of Nations Covenant was included as Part 1 of the Treaty of Versailles. But the Balfour Declaration has not yet been made legally binding. That takes place when all of these documents come together into a single resolution known as the San Remo Resolution of April the 24th and 25th, 1920, so called because the conference was held in San Remo, Italy. The attending nations were the Group of Four, as mentioned already: France, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan. During the conference, however, the United States of America was added as an observer only. And as mentioned earlier, because the United States of America and the Ottoman Empire were never officially at war with each other, the United States was not a direct party of the San Remo Resolution at this point. The San Remo Resolution explicitly referenced the Balfour Declaration, and it made it legally binding. At this point in history, we see established the first multinational, international legal agreement affirming Jewish rights to all of Palestine. Let us now look at this resolution in more detail. In 1920, Lord Curzon wrote a letter to then Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Lloyd George, in which he wrote that the San Remo Resolution was the Magna Carta of Jewish sovereignty over Palestine, a direct reference to the actual Magna Carta signed in the year 1215 by King John, a document which outlined and guaranteed the rights and liberties of the English people. The San Remo Resolution was drawn up as a draft and as a final resolution over a 2-day period. At the end of the first day, 4 monumental legal events took place. First, Palestine was created as a nation. Second, Palestine was declared to be the Jewish national home. Third, sovereignty over Palestine was transferred to the Jewish people. And fourth, the Group of Four agreed to put into effect the Balfour Declaration. Now, discussions continued during the second day, and it was further decided that Great Britain would be the nation responsible for putting into effect the Balfour Declaration, and that it would become the mandatory for Palestine. Although Palestine's borders had not yet been defined, the Group of Four agreed that the intent was to recreate the borders that Israel had in the days of King David and King Solomon, including the borders that Israel had up until the time that the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. The biblical phrase used by David Lloyd George, which appears numerous times in the Bible, was "from Dan to Beersheba." It was not meant to be a literal definition, but a conceptual one. So we see that the legal foundation for Jewish sovereignty over Palestine was laid down between the years 1917 and 1920. A very important 2.5 years indeed. It must be stated that the existence of numerous Arab states on more than 95% of the Middle East is also a direct result of the San Remo Resolution. In other words, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, for example, are all legally justified in the modern world based on this very same international treaty, the San Remo Resolution. Let us now take a look at some international legal agreements that recognize the validity of the San Remo Resolution. First, we have the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920. Now, because this treaty was later superseded by the Treaty of Lausanne after the Turkish War of Independence, it hasn't been properly recognized by many today. Nevertheless, this treaty was an internationally valid treaty drawn up between the Allied powers and the Ottoman Empire, and it explicitly recognized the San Remo Resolution. Second, we have the Franco-British Boundary Convention of 1920. This treaty was drawn up between France and Great Britain in order to define the border between the mandated countries of Palestine and Syria. Third, we have the Mandate for Palestine itself of 1922, the legal constitution for Palestine. Fourth, the Anglo-American Convention of 1924 was a treaty that bound the United States of America to the terms of the San Remo Resolution, if you remember, having been excluded from having legal standing up until this point. As a result of this treaty, the United States of America became legally bound with Great Britain to the terms of the San Remo Resolution with respect to the Jewish people. And finally, we have the United Nations Charter of 1945. So how did the UN inherit the legal responsibility to protect and uphold the legal framework we've just laid out? The Covenant of the League of Nations, which incorporated the mandate system as already explained, laid the foundation for the San Remo Resolution. The San Remo Resolution, which incorporated the Balfour Declaration, as already explained, laid the legal foundation and justification for the Mandate for Palestine. And it is this document, the Mandate for Palestine itself, which was preserved intact in the UN Charter under Article 80. So what does all of this mean for us today? First, it means that all Jewish rights under the Mandate remain in full force today, including in particular the right to establish Jewish settlements in any part of the former mandated Palestine that is under effective Israeli control. And second, it means that no UN body or agency can legally prevent Jews from exercising their rights by interfering with those rights as defined in the Mandate or transferring those rights to any non-Jewish entity. Article 80 directly states the following: nothing in this chapter shall be construed in or of itself to alter in any manner the rights whatsoever of any states or any peoples, or the terms of existing international instruments to which members of the United Nations may respectively be parties. As you can see, it is no wonder that Article 80 of the UN Charter became known as the Jewish Peoples Clause. Let us now review the basic structure of the mandate and the transfer of sovereignty to the Jewish people that took place after World War I. Sovereignty over Palestine was transferred to the supreme Allied powers of World War I, those powers which defeated the Ottoman Empire, and this sovereignty was subsequently transferred to the Jewish people. This was accomplished between the years 1919, beginning with the Smuts Resolution, and 1923, when the Mandate for Palestine went into effect. Great Britain would serve as mandatory, acting as administrator, trustee, and tutor on behalf of the Jewish people, and the Council of the League of Nations would act as supervisor, ensuring that the mandatory executed its official responsibilities properly. In conclusion, we have established three significant pillars of Jewish sovereignty to Palestine under international law in the modern world. First, the principle of self-determination. This principle was enshrined in Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, as mentioned already. Second, the Balfour Declaration, a document made legally binding as a result of the San Remo Resolution, wherein the Jewish people were declared to be the national beneficiary of the principle of self-determination in Palestine. And third, the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine, which answers the question why the mandate of Palestine should be different from all other mandates. In the second part of our presentation, we will examine the historical period of Palestine during the Mandate years.